November 8, 1942. The pre-dawn darkness along the Moroccan coast carries the smell of salt water and diesel fuel as the first wave of American troops wades ashore near Fedala during Operation Torch. Among them, a young infantryman from Ohio struggles through the surf carrying a weapon his unit received only 3 weeks earlier, a 5-foot tube of stamped metal that weighs just 13 pounds. The weapon has no official name yet, though the men have taken to calling it the bazooka after a musical instrument from a radio comedian's act. It looks absurd in his hands, too simple, too light, more like a length of industrial pipe than a proper anti-tank weapon. The tube is crude, the sight primitive, the whole design seemingly thrown together in haste. Behind him, other soldiers whisper doubts. One sergeant said it looked like something a child might build from scrap metal. Another claimed the shaped charge warhead couldn't possibly penetrate armor plate. As the young Ohioan reaches the beach and drops behind a dune, German propaganda leaflets scattered in the sand mock American equipment as inferior copies of European designs. 6,000 miles away in Berlin, German intelligence analysts examining reports of this new American weapon dismiss it as desperate improvisation from a nation unprepared for modern war. They do not yet understand that this crude tube of metal will become the nightmare that haunts every German tank crew, the weapon that turns the mathematics of armored warfare on its head, proof that American ingenuity could transform the simplest concepts into instruments of devastating effectiveness. The story of the bazooka begins not with military planners, but with a fundamental problem that plagued every army in the early years of World War II: the infantryman's helplessness before the tank. By 1940, the German blitzkrieg had demonstrated that massed armor, properly coordinated with air power and motorized infantry, could shatter defensive lines that had held for years during the Great War. The panzer divisions that swept through France carried within them the concentrated violence of the industrial age. Dozens of tons of steel plate moving at speeds that defied traditional defensive tactics. Against these machines, the individual soldier possessed almost nothing. Anti-tank rifles, developed in the previous war, fired bullets that bounced harmlessly off modern armor. Magnetic mines required suicidal bravery to place. Artillery could stop tanks, but artillery could not be everywhere. The German tank crews who rolled across Europe in those early years felt a particular sense of invulnerability. They were the new knights, encased in mobile fortresses, masters of the battlefield. Their armor was measured in millimeters of hardened steel, their guns in calibers designed to punch through enemy tanks at 1,000 meters. What could a man on foot do against such power? The Americans who studied this problem in 1940 and 1941 faced constraints their enemies could barely imagine. The United States Army, ranked 19th in the world in size in 1939, possessed virtually no modern anti-tank capabilities. The nation's industrial base, still recovering from the Depression, had produced almost no weapons of any kind for a decade. There were officers who remembered the Great War, who understood the mathematics of penetration and armor, but there was no time for conventional development cycles, no years available to perfect designs through iterative testing. Everything had to be done in months, not years. Everything had to be simple enough for mass production, robust enough for combat conditions, light enough for a single soldier to carry. Into this environment came a mild-mannered physicist named Robert Goddard, better known for his pioneering work on liquid-fueled rockets, and a young Army ordnance officer named Leslie Skinner. Their collaboration, begun in 1940, focused on a principle that seemed almost too simple. A shaped explosive charge, properly designed, could focus its blast into a jet of superheated gas and molten metal capable of penetrating armor plate far thicker than the charge itself. The shaped charge was not an American invention. Swiss and German researchers had explored the concept for decades, but the Americans approached it with a characteristic pragmatism that prioritized functionality over elegance. Skinner and his team at the Aberdeen Proving Ground worked with desperate speed through 1941, testing charge configurations, trying different metals for the liner, experimenting with standoff distances. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source: observations of how oil well perforation charges worked in civilian industry. By forming the explosive in a cone shape with a copper liner, the blast could be focused into a narrow jet traveling at speeds approaching 25,000 feet per second, fast enough to punch through armor plate not through mechanical force, but through hydrodynamic penetration, the metal behaving less like a solid and more like a fluid under such extreme conditions. The charge turned physics itself into a weapon, but a shaped charge alone was not enough. It had to be delivered to the target, and that delivery system had to be portable, simple, and cheap enough to produce in vast quantities. The solution was the rocket, not the sophisticated, gyroscopically stabilized rockets that would come later, but a simple tube-launched projectile stabilized by fins, powered by a solid fuel motor that burned out within feet of launch. The launcher itself was almost comically simple: a steel tube, open at both ends, with a crude electrical firing mechanism and a basic sight. The rocket motor's exhaust vented backwards, eliminating recoil and allowing the weapon to be fired from the shoulder. In testing through early 1942, the combination of shaped charge warhead and rocket delivery proved devastatingly effective against armor plate. A weapon that weighed less than 15 pounds, that could be carried by any infantryman, that required minimal training to operate, could penetrate armor that would stop conventional anti-tank rifles. The bazooka, officially designated the M1 rocket launcher, entered production in May 1942. By the time American troops boarded ships for North Africa, over 5,000 had been manufactured. The weapon arrived in theater so recently that many soldiers first saw it only days before going ashore. The German tank crews who encountered the bazooka in Tunisia in late 1942 and early 1943 initially dismissed it with the same contempt their intelligence services had shown. The Panzer IV and Tiger I tanks that equipped German armored divisions represented the pinnacle of European military engineering: complex machines requiring months to produce, incorporating lessons learned across 3 years of combat. Their armor was carefully calculated, their guns precisely calibrated, their crews trained in elite schools where armor doctrine was studied with academic rigor. When reports filtered back of American infantry destroying tanks with shoulder-fired rockets, many German officers assumed the accounts were exaggerated, or that the losses resulted from lucky hits on weak points. The Tiger I, which began appearing in Tunisia in December 1942, seemed to embody invulnerability itself. Its frontal armor measured 100 millimeters thick, proof against virtually every Allied tank gun then in service. Its 88 gun could destroy enemy armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. German crews called it the furniture van, less from its size than from the sense of secure enclosure it provided. Inside a Tiger, buttoned up with hatches sealed, the crew existed in a world of mechanical sounds and diesel smell, separated from the chaos outside by walls of hardened steel. This sense of security was not mere psychology. In early engagements in Tunisia, single Tigers destroyed dozens of Allied tanks without suffering meaningful damage in return. But the bazooka did not care about frontal armor thickness or the Tiger's legendary reputation. The shaped charge warhead, properly employed, could penetrate over 4 inches of armor plate, more than enough to defeat the side and rear armor of any German tank in service. The weapon's effectiveness depended not on the user's strength or marksmanship at long range, but on patience, positioning, and the courage to let a 50-ton machine approach to within 100 yards before firing. In the broken terrain of Tunisia, in the narrow streets of Italian towns, in the hedgerows of Normandy, American infantry learned that tanks, for all their power, were nearly blind. The buttoned-up crew could see only narrow slices of the world through periscopes and vision blocks. They were loud, betraying their position with engine noise and the grinding of treads. They were vulnerable from the sides and rear, where armor was thinnest. A squad with bazookas, properly positioned, could wait until a tank passed, then strike from angles the crew could neither see nor protect. The first German tank destroyed by a bazooka in combat was a Panzer IV knocked out near Fedala on November 8, 1942. The crew survived, stunned and incredulous, insisting they had been hit by artillery. When American troops showed them the simple tube that had defeated their tank, the Germans laughed, certain it was some kind of deception. The laughter stopped within weeks. By December, as fighting intensified around the Kasserine Pass, German after-action reports began mentioning the pipe weapon with increasing frequency and respect. Tank commanders who had operated with confidence through the French and Russian campaigns found themselves nervous about infantry they could not see, about shapes in rubble that might conceal men with tubes. The psychological transformation was as important as the tactical one. The bazooka returned agency to the individual soldier. It said that a 19-year-old farm boy from Iowa, properly positioned and courageous enough to hold his ground, could destroy a machine that cost the German war economy over 200,000 man-hours to produce. It said that armor, for all its material strength, could not guarantee survival against an enemy armed with rocket weapons. By early 1943, German tactical instructions were emphasizing the danger of American rocket launchers, warning tank crews to avoid enclosed spaces, to maintain distance from concealed positions, to never operate without infantry support. The hunters had become the hunted. The transformation was not one-sided. American infantry learned through bitter experience that the bazooka, for all its effectiveness, demanded courage bordering on recklessness. The weapon's effective range was under 200 yards, point-blank range for a tank's machine guns. The backblast, though manageable in open terrain, could be catastrophic in enclosed spaces, filling foxholes and rooms with superheated gas. The shaped charge warhead, while deadly against armor, was nearly useless against fortified positions or infantry in the open. And the rocket motor, for all its simplicity, was temperamental in cold weather, occasionally failing to ignite or burning incompletely. In the Ardennes in December 1944, soldiers reported bazookas failing to fire in the sub-zero temperatures, leaving them helpless before advancing German armor. Yet for every failure, there were dozens of successes. The official U.S. Army history records over 500 German tanks destroyed by bazookas in the European theater, a figure that almost certainly undercounts actual kills, given the chaos of battlefield reporting. In Italy, in the rubble of Cassino and Anzio, bazookas proved so effective in urban combat that German commanders avoided built-up areas whenever possible, knowing that every window and doorway might conceal a soldier with a rocket launcher. The Tiger tank crews who faced bazookas in Normandy in the summer of 1944 found themselves in a nightmare landscape where their armor's strengths became liabilities. The hedgerows of Normandy, ancient earthen walls topped with thick vegetation, created thousands of enclosed spaces where visibility dropped to meters and maneuver was impossible. American infantry, learning from hard experience, developed tactics specifically designed to exploit these conditions. A squad would fix the tank in place with suppressive fire while bazooka teams maneuvered to the flanks, using the hedgerows as concealment. The Tiger, designed for the open spaces of the Russian steppe, could not traverse its gun fast enough to engage multiple threats at close range. Its thick frontal armor was irrelevant when American rockets struck from the side or rear. German tank commanders began reporting something unprecedented: fear. Not fear of enemy tanks, which they could still engage and destroy at long range, but fear of invisible infantry with weapons that turned their armored fortresses into death traps. One Tiger commander, captured after his tank was destroyed near Khan, told his interrogators that he felt safer dismounted than inside his tank in close terrain. The statement represented a complete inversion of armored warfare's fundamental logic. The crude metal tube became something more than a weapon. It became a symbol of American industrial philosophy, the belief that simple, mass-produced solutions could overcome technically superior but complex systems. While German and Soviet anti-tank weapons grew steadily more sophisticated through the war, incorporating rifled barrels, complex sights, and precision manufacturing, the bazooka remained essentially unchanged from its original 1942 design. It was made from stamped and welded steel using techniques borrowed from plumbing and electrical conduit manufacturing. Its rocket motor used simple black powder, not the sophisticated propellants employed in artillery shells. Its sight was a wire frame that required no adjustment for range or wind. An average American factory worker could be trained to manufacture bazooka components in a matter of days. The weapon embodied a particularly American approach to warfare. Build something that works. Build it simply enough that millions can use it. Build it cheaply enough that you can produce it in quantities that overwhelm the enemy's ability to respond. By war's end, over 470,000 bazookas had been manufactured, along with millions of rockets. The weapon equipped not only American forces but British, Soviet, and Free French units through Lend-Lease. It appeared in every theater, from the jungles of Burma to the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima. The German response to the bazooka was characteristic of their approach to weapons development throughout the war: technically sophisticated, tactically effective, but ultimately hampered by complexity and production constraints. The Panzerschreck, introduced in late 1943, was essentially an enlarged copy of the captured American weapon, firing a larger caliber rocket with a more powerful shaped charge warhead. It was more effective than the bazooka at penetrating armor, but it was also heavier, more expensive to produce, and prone to mechanical problems. The Panzerfaust, a disposable single-shot weapon introduced in 1944, represented a different approach, so simple that it could be manufactured by semi-skilled laborers in dispersed workshops, distributed in massive quantities to Volkssturm militia and regular troops alike. By late 1944, German infantry were actually better equipped with anti-tank rocket weapons than their American counterparts. Yet this technological parity came too late and at too high a cost. The resources devoted to producing millions of Panzerfausts might have been better spent on tanks or artillery or aircraft, weapons that could influence battles at operational rather than tactical levels. The Germans, masters of military technology, found themselves dedicating precious industrial capacity to copying an American weapon they had initially dismissed as crude improvisation. In the Pacific Theater, the bazooka encountered a different set of challenges. Japanese tanks, designed for operations in Manchuria against Chinese forces, were lightly armored by European standards, rarely more than 25 millimeters on the frontal plates. Against such targets, the bazooka was almost grotesquely overpowered, its shaped charge warhead capable of penetrating clean through the armor and exiting the far side. Yet Japanese tactics, emphasizing night attacks, close-quarter combat, and fortified positions, made the bazooka equally valuable in the Pacific. On Saipan in June 1944, Marine Corps units used bazookas to reduce fortified positions at ranges where tank guns could not be brought to bear. On Iwo Jima, bazookas became one of the few weapons effective against Japanese pillboxes built into volcanic rock, the rockets detonating inside firing ports where conventional explosives could not reach. The weapon proved its versatility was not limited to its intended anti-tank role. It was simply a means of delivering explosive force precisely to a point in space, and that capability had applications far beyond destroying armored vehicles. The bazooka's influence extended beyond the Second World War. The principle it embodied, that shaped charge warheads launched by simple rockets could give infantry organic anti-tank capabilities, became fundamental to military thinking in the post-war era. Every major army developed similar weapons, from the Soviet RPG series to the Swedish Carl Gustaf to the modern Javelin missile. The evolution was toward increasing sophistication, but the core concept remained unchanged. A man on foot, properly armed, could threaten the heaviest armor. This reality fundamentally altered the calculus of armored warfare. Tanks could no longer operate independently of infantry. Urban terrain, once considered merely difficult for armor, became nearly suicidal without extensive infantry support. The age of armor dominance, which had seemed so absolute in 1940, proved shorter than anyone expected, ended not by better tanks but by better infantry weapons. The crude metal tube had rewritten the rules. The German tank commanders who survived the war and later wrote memoirs of their experiences consistently cited the bazooka as one of the weapons they most feared. Not the Sherman tank, which their Tigers could destroy at leisure. Not American artillery, devastating though it was, but the simple rocket launcher in the hands of infantry they could not see until it was too late. General Heinz Guderian, father of German armor doctrine, wrote after the war that the proliferation of infantry anti-tank rockets represented a fundamental challenge to mobile warfare as he had conceived it. The Panzer divisions had achieved their greatest victories through speed and shock, concentrating armor at decisive points to shatter enemy lines before defensive weapons could respond. But what use was speed when every hedgerow might conceal a soldier with a weapon that could destroy a tank in a single shot? What advantage did armor provide when the armor itself made you a target? The questions haunted German tactical thinking through the war's final years, as the panzer divisions that had conquered half of Europe found themselves increasingly constrained, hesitant, unable to maneuver with the confidence that had characterized their earlier campaigns. The young infantryman from Ohio who waited ashore at Fedala carrying that crude metal tube survived the war. He fought in Tunisia, Sicily, and Italy, and his bazooka claimed 3 German tanks before the war ended, 2 Panzer IVs, and a Tiger knocked out in the rubble of Cassino with a shot that struck the engine deck at less than 40 yards. In interviews decades later, he described the moment of firing at the Tiger, the way his hands shook as the massive tank rumbled past his position, the impossible decision to hold fire until the flank was exposed, the whoosh of the rocket igniting and the immediate certainty, even before the explosion, that the shot was true. He described the German crew bailing out, stunned and terrified, and how they stared at him with incomprehension when he showed them the weapon that had defeated their machine. They could not believe it. They could not reconcile the sophisticated product of German engineering with defeat at the hands of something that looked like industrial scrap. But that incomprehension was itself revealing. It showed the limits of a worldview that equated technical sophistication with battlefield effectiveness, that believed wars were won by the side with the most advanced equipment. The Americans understood something different, that wars were won by the side that could arm every soldier with weapons adequate to their task, that could produce those weapons in quantities that overwhelmed enemy advantages in quality, that could adapt and improvise and prioritize functionality over perfection. The bazooka remains today in museums and veterans' halls, a relic of a war nearly forgotten by those who did not live it. The weapon looks primitive compared to modern anti-tank missiles with their thermal sights and tandem warheads and top-attack profiles. Yet its descendants equip every infantry squad in every modern army. The principle it embodied, that individual soldiers could carry weapons capable of destroying the heaviest armored vehicles, became so fundamental to military thinking that it is now taken for granted. We forget how revolutionary it seemed in 1942, how it upset every assumption about armored warfare, how it gave hope to infantrymen who had watched tanks roll across Europe with seeming invulnerability. The crude metal tube was more than a weapon. It was proof that ingenuity and mass production could overcome material disadvantages, that simplicity could triumph over sophistication, that a democracy organizing its industrial might toward a clear purpose could out-innovate and outproduce any totalitarian system. The German tank crews who mocked it learned this lesson too late. The Tigers went up in smoke, burned not by superior armor or bigger guns, but by simple rockets in the hands of soldiers who refused to be helpless before the machines of war. In that refusal, in that insistence on fighting back with whatever tools could be devised and mass-produced and put into the hands of millions, lay a truth about American power that Hitler's generals never fully understood. Not until the tubes appeared in every hedgerow, every window, every shadow, and the invulnerable armor proved vulnerable after all.